Chapter 1. The last waltz in Marple night air was crisp with the scent of lilacs and freshly mown grass as the last strains of the waltz drifted through the open windows of Raven Hall. Inside the grand ballroom, candlelight flickered across polished wood floors and crystal chandeliers, casting dancing shadows over the gathered villagers of Marple. It was the annual spring gala, a tradition since before the war, and this year, with the return of Raven Hall's elusive heir, Mr. Nathaniel Harper, the occasion had taken on a particular sparkle. The hall had been shut for nearly a decade, its windows shuttered and gardens overgrown, ever since old Sir Edgar Harper passed away under hushed circumstances. But tonight, Raven Hall was alive again, full of music, laughter, and gossip. Miss Marple sat near the edge of the room in a high-backed wooden chair that had seen better days, a cup of weak tea resting delicately in her gloved hands. She was dressed, as always, with simple elegance, a dusky rose-colored blouse and gray skirt, her white hair perfectly pinned. Few noticed her amid the swirl of silk dresses and polished shoes, but she noticed everything. Across the floor, couples twirled and swayed. Mrs. Georgina Arkwright, the vicar's wife, laughed just a little too brightly at something said by the much younger Mr. Peter Nash. The two spinster sisters, Ida and Mabel Green, sat stiffly along the wall, clearly disapproving of the entire affair. And in the corner, a quiet argument was unfolding between Nathaniel Harper and his cousin, Margaret Linden, barely hidden behind a velvet curtain. Miss Marple watched, not out of nosiness, or so she would insist, but from a lifetime's habit of observation. It was in the way Margaret's hand trembled slightly when she clutched her fan, or the tension behind Nathaniel's polished smile. Something was amiss. The music slowed. A hush settled. And then came the sound no one expected. A scream. It was sharp and thin, as though ripped from someone's throat, and for a moment, everyone froze. Miss Marple stood quickly, her teacup forgotten. The scream had come from the conservatory. Within seconds, the guests rushed in that direction, their heels clattering against stone tiles and murmurs rising like storm winds. Miss Marple followed, weaving through the startled crowd with quiet purpose. There, sprawled across the marble floor, illuminated by moonlight and the soft glow of oil lamps, lay the body of Nathaniel Harper. His eyes were wide open, his mouth twisted. Mid-breath. The front of his waistcoat was soaked with blood. Margaret Linden stood nearby, trembling violently, her hand still outstretched as though trying to stop something that had already happened. The room fell into silence. Someone whispered, "He's dead." Miss Marple did not speak. She only looked at the blood, the body, the expressions on each face, and quietly she knew not how it had happened, not why, but something was terribly wrong. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Conservatory. Constable from Marlecombe, a stout man named Harold Finch, arrived within 20 minutes, red-faced and short of breath. He had been pulled from his dinner by a panicked telephone call from Mrs. Arkwright, who had insisted, in no uncertain terms, that a terrible tragedy had unfolded at Raven Hall, and that Jane Marple was already on the scene. This last detail Finch noted with both relief and trepidation. Miss Marple's presence meant two things. The situation was indeed serious, and he would, sooner or later, feel quite out of his depth. By the time Finch arrived, the guests had been herded back into the drawing room, away from the body. Only a few remained in the conservatory. Margaret Linden, pale and silent, sitting stiffly on a small bench. Dr. Edward Carleton crouched beside the corpse, examining it with a practiced eye, and Miss Marple, who stood just beyond the body, studying a faint smear of something on the marble floor. "I must insist no one leave the premises," Finch announced, chest puffed out. "This is now a crime scene, and the investigation is underway." Margaret gave no reply. She stared straight ahead, as though she hadn't heard him. That doctor, Carlton, stood slowly and adjusted his spectacles. He's been dead no more than half an hour, he said quietly. Stab wound, clean, deep, right below the sternum. The heart, I'd say. Finch turned to Miss Marple. And you were here when it happened? I was present, she said mildly, though not in the conservatory. The scream brought us all running. Did anyone see anyone come or go? Finch asked, pulling a notebook from his coat. His pen hovered above the page. Too many people. Too much movement, said the doctor. It was chaos. And the body? It hadn't been there long. Finch grunted. No murder weapon? Not yet found, Miss Marple replied, though I imagine it's nearby. One seldom carries out such acts with the intention of leaving the premises calmly, especially in a room full of villagers and champagne. Finch gave her a look, uncertain whether to be irritated or grateful. He settled on neutral respect. Miss Marple glanced again at Margaret, whose hands lay frozen in her lap. There was a long scratch on her wrist, fresh. Not deep, but noticeable. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, her lipstick faintly smeared. She found him, Miss Marple said quietly. Didn't you, dear? Margaret turned slowly. Her lips parted. I did. I came in to find Nathaniel. He hadn't danced since the first waltz, I thought. I thought perhaps he'd stepped outside for air. And then her voice faded. Finch nodded and made a note. And you didn't see anyone else in the room? No, she whispered. Only him. Miss Marple tilted her head. You were arguing earlier, I believe. Behind the curtain, just before the dance ended. Margaret blinked. What? You and Nathaniel? Miss Marple said gently. It seemed rather heated. Margaret's face flushed. That was personal. A family matter. Of course, Miss Marple replied. Only family matters often become rather public when tempers flare. Finch glanced between them, sensing a story he didn't yet understand. What were you arguing about? I'd rather not say, Margaret replied. Her voice was steel. Now, I'm afraid you may not have that luxury, Miss Linden, Finch said firmly. A man has been killed. Miss Marple looked past them both, toward the edge of the conservatory floor. There, hidden beneath a nearby table, something gleamed. Took a step forward. Constable, she said softly, might I trouble you for a handkerchief? Finch handed one over, and she bent carefully, retrieving the small object. It was a brooch, a golden rose pin still open, the edge tinged faintly with blood. She turned it over in her hand and nodded thoughtfully. This hadn't been a simple crime of passion. It was planned and messy, and someone at Ravenhall had lied. Chapter 3. A village that knows too much by morning. The village of Marleycombe was abuzz with rumors, as if the spring wind itself had carried the whispers. From cottage to cottage, the murder at Ravenhall was all anyone could speak of, though no one claimed to know anything for certain. Yet somehow, everyone knew everything. At the bakery, Mrs. Felton swore she'd seen Nathaniel Harper arguing with a stranger the day before the gala. At the post office, old Mr. Dawlish insisted the butler had once done time in Liverpool, a tale he'd fabricated entirely, but with such conviction that several villagers repeated it as gospel by noon. And at the Rose and Thistle pub, half of Marleycombe was certain Margaret Linden had poisoned her cousin years ago, and had merely finished the job last night. Miss Marple, meanwhile, sat quietly at her breakfast table, sipping lukewarm tea and nibbling toast with orange marmalade. Her cat, Mr. Tibbs, slept curled on the windowsill. The morning light streamed through lace curtains, catching dust motes in the air. She turned the Marleycombe Chronicle over in her hands. Nathaniel Harper's name had already made the front page. Promising young heir found murdered at Ravenhall. It read, Villagers in shock. Police investigating. She folded the paper neatly and laid it aside. There was always something theatrical about murder, she thought. The suddenness of it. The way it froze time. Wrapped everyone in silence for a moment. Then shattered into noise. Reactions became performances. Grief sharpened into suspicion. Truth twisted just slightly in the mouths of those telling it. And nowhere was truth more expertly distorted than in small villages. By mid-morning, Constable Finch called on her, hat in hand, looking more overwhelmed than usual. Miss Marple, he said as she welcomed him into her tidy sitting room. I'm getting pressure from county. They've sent for a detective from the city. Inspector Lestrange. Should be here by tonight. A dramatic name, she said, pouring him tea. Sugar? 2 lumps, thank you. Yes, dramatic. And probably twice as loud. They think this. Case is significant. It is, Miss Marple replied. But not for the reasons they'll expect. Finch sipped his tea and looked down. I still don't see how someone could have slipped away, in the middle of the gala, done the thing, and then come back unnoticed. That's because, she said calmly, you're imagining a stranger. Finch frowned. I don't think a stranger could have known where Nathaniel would be, or how to disappear so quickly, or why that brooch, a rather specific piece of jewelry, was dropped in the very room the murder occurred. Finch hesitated. We've asked Margaret about it. She claims she's never seen it before. Did she? Miss Marple asked mildly, raising an eyebrow. Finch sighed. She's got no solid alibi. And her fingerprints were on a broken glass, found under the table near the body. But so far, nothing's conclusive. I just don't want to accuse someone wrongly. A wise instinct, Miss Marple sighed, rising from her chair and retrieving a small notebook from the mantel. That brooch, for example, I've seen it before. Finch sat straighter. Where? On the lapel of Georgina Arkwright's coat. The day she visited me last week to ask about flower arrangements for the church fete. The vicar's wife? Finch said, astonished. But she was at the gala. She was indeed. And she danced 3 times with Peter Nash, while her husband looked on with something between boredom and embarrassment. Finch stared at her. Are you saying Georgina Arkwright? I'm saying, Miss Marple interrupted gently, that if you wish to understand a crime, you must begin not with blood or fingerprints or even motive. She paused, eyes twinkling just faintly. You begin with people, and how very badly they wish to keep things hidden. Chapter 4. Inspector Lestrange arrives the late afternoon train screeched into Marleycombe Station with an indignant hiss, disturbing a flock of drowsy pigeons and sending young Timothy Croft sprinting off the platform in delight. Among the passengers stepping off onto the weathered platform was a tall, narrow-faced man in a charcoal suit and camel overcoat. He wore a trilby angled with purpose and carried a brown leather case in one hand, a gloved hand that never trembled. Alaric Lestrange had arrived. Word of his coming had reached the village long before his train. By the time he walked briskly up the stone path toward Raven Hall, half the villagers had already decided whether they liked him or not. Too polished, said Mrs. Felton at the bakery. Too clever by half, muttered Mr. Dawlish. Looks like someone from a film, said one of the Green sisters with disapproval, as though that were a personal affront. Inside Raven Hall, Constable Finch stood nervously in the great hall, straightening his tie. Inspector, he greeted. Lestrange barely nodded. Where is the body? Still in the conservatory. We haven't moved it yet. Dr. Carlton gave his report this morning. Good. I prefer to see them undisturbed. The inspector crossed the threshold into the conservatory, his eyes moving, with the slow calculation of someone who catalogued chaos for a living. The body, now draped respectfully with a sheet, remained where it had fallen, I trust you've secured statements? He asked without turning. Yes, sir. Everyone who was in the house last night has been asked to remain. Most are at the vicarage or back in town. And the woman, Margaret Linden? She's here. In the study, resting. Doctor's orders. Lestrange's eyes narrowed. Miss Marple, who had been sitting quietly in a cane-backed chair near the conservatory windows, now cleared her throat softly. Lestrange turned to regard her. And you must be Miss Marple. I must, she said with a pleasant smile. And you must be Inspector Lestrange. I've heard of you. You've meddled in 6 investigations, if I recall correctly. I prefer the term assisted. He gave her a look she'd seen a dozen times before. Polite dismissal, tempered by curiosity. Your constable tells me you've already formed theories. Only gentle observations, she replied. Then gently tell me, he said, how a man was murdered in a crowded house full of guests, without a single witness. She looked out the window, where dusk was turning the gardens silver blue. Because, she said quietly, the murderer wasn't hiding. He or she was seen, spoke, smiled, laughed, and perhaps even danced. Lestrange studied her for a moment. Then he stepped back toward the center of the conservatory and pulled back the sheet. The room fell silent. I've worked in London, he said. Seen crimes staged by professionals. Gangland executions. Poisonings with no trace. Crimes designed to be puzzles. He looked at the lifeless form of Nathaniel Harper. But this feels personal, brutal, emotional. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Yes, but not uncontrolled. She walked over to a corner table where a vase of peonies had been knocked over during the chaos. She touched the edge of the table, then looked at the floor, at the faint mark left by a heel. Have you spoken to Georgina Arkwright? She asked, briefly. Her husband vouched for her. She claimed to have danced most of the evening. With Peter Nash. 3 times, Miss Marple said. Rather a lot for a married woman. Especially one who asked me, not a week ago, whether I believed young Peter was truly as poor as he looked. Lestrange frowned. Why would she care? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Because she hoped he wasn't. The inspector straightened. Are you suggesting Georgina Arkwright was involved with Mr. Harper? Oh, no, she replied softly. Nathaniel wasn't her concern, but Peter Nash was, and so was a promise of money. Lestrange turned slowly to face her. A triangle, he murmured, or perhaps a square. Miss Marple looked out toward the hall. Or a circle, she said, where everyone touches and no one is truly innocent. Chapter 5. The smile that didn't reach his eyes that evening. Ravenhall was quieter than it had been in years. The laughter and champagne of the gala felt like a distant illusion, replaced now by creaking floorboards, hushed conversations, and a heavy stillness that pressed against the walls like mist. Peter Nash stood in the drawing-room, staring at the embers in the fireplace. The dancing flames cast orange light across his sharp cheekbones and troubled brow. A glass of brandy sat untouched on the side table beside him. He was a handsome man, lean, confident, always quick with a smile, but tonight the charm seemed dulled. He didn't hear the footsteps behind him until Miss Marple appeared, her cane tapping gently against the polished floor. You should drink that, she said mildly. Nodding toward the glass, Peter turned, startled. Miss Marple. I didn't see you. No, you rarely do, she said. You don't tend to notice people, unless you think they're watching you. He managed a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I suppose you think I had something to do with this, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the conservatory. Oh, I try not to think anything too soon, she said pleasantly. But I do. Like to notice things. Like how you danced with Mrs. Arkwright several times last night, yet you were nowhere to be seen when the music stopped. I stepped out for a cigarette. Miss Marple nodded. Ah, and was that before or after? You were seen arguing with Nathaniel Harper by the North Terrace? He stiffened. Who said I was arguing? Several people, she said, brushing non-existent dust from her sleeve. You see, in villages like ours, one never really has a private moment, not when people know how to listen. Peter looked. Away, jaw tight. He was threatening me, was he? Her voice was light, but her gaze sharp. And why would he do that? He hesitated. Because I owed him money. A business matter. Miss Marple tilted her head. But Nathaniel wasn't a businessman. He inherited Raven Hall, yes, but he barely lived in it. Until a week ago, he was in Switzerland. No history of lending. No investments in local affairs. Curious that he would loan money to you. Peter said nothing. Especially, she continued, when Margaret Linden told me this morning that Nathaniel was planning to sell the estate and leave England again. That caught him off guard. I didn't know that, he said slowly. Oh, I think you did. Or at least you suspected. You see, Nathaniel's return ruined quite a few quiet arrangements in this village. And people don't like their secrets disturbed. Peter narrowed his eyes. You think you've figured this out, haven't you? No, she said. But I've begun to untangle the edges. That's always the hardest part, pulling on the threads without tearing the whole cloth. She looked toward the window. The sun was low now, painting the sky with streaks of violet and rose. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked. Did. You know, she said quietly, that Nathaniel had planned to make a public announcement during the gala? Peter blinked. What kind of announcement? Miss Marple didn't answer. She simply looked at him kindly, but with a precision that made him shift on his feet. I wonder, she murmured, how many hearts stopped the moment he fell, and not from grief, but from fear. She left him standing there, the fire crackling behind him. The brandy untouched. Peter Nash ran a hand through his hair and let out a slow breath. Behind him, the flames flickered, and somewhere in the shadows, someone else was listening. Chapter 6. The letter in the drawer. Inspector Lestrange was not a man given to dramatic gestures. His style, unlike that of the London detectives in penny novels, was deliberate, quiet, methodical, and layered in skepticism. And yet, as he sat in Nathaniel Harper's private study that evening, he allowed himself a rare moment of excitement. The study had been untouched since the murder. Heavy curtains were still drawn, the fire long gone cold. A faint scent of cigar smoke lingered in the air. The room was lined with tall bookcases and dusty cabinets, not the sort filled with classic volumes, but those strange combinations of estate ledgers, foreign travel journals, and political memoirs that only the idle wealthy seemed to collect. Curious. Room for a man who didn't like England, Lestrange muttered. Miss Marple, seated across from him, was leafing through an old photo album on the desk. She wasn't reading it, not really, but she always found people more honest when their eyes weren't being watched. I wonder what Nathaniel hoped to find when he came back here, she said softly. A buyer, perhaps, Lestrange replied. A clean break. He could have left it all behind again, just like he did before. Miss Marple nodded, then glanced toward the large mahogany writing desk. Have you checked the drawers? Lestrange had, of course, but not thoroughly. It hadn't seemed urgent. He crossed the room and opened the central drawer. Pens, envelopes, nothing more. The smaller drawer to the right creaked as it slid open, old brass hinges resisting. There, beneath a tattered set of business cards and a dried-up fountain pen, was an envelope. Not sealed. Folded once. Lestrange opened it. Inside was a short handwritten letter, the ink uneven, the handwriting thick and jagged. To Margaret. By the time you read this, I will have made my decision. I can't go through with the sale unless you tell me the truth about Peter, about the money, and about what you did in Geneva. You owe me that much. If I don't hear from you by Friday, I'll go to the police." And he read it again, then slowly handed it to Miss Marple. She read in silence. Then, so it wasn't just a family quarrel. It was a threat. "Yes," Lestrange said, "but not to Margaret alone." Miss Marple nodded, placing the letter carefully back on the desk. "There are very few people," she said, "who know how dangerous secrets are until someone threatens to reveal them." Lestrange folded his arms. "Do you think Margaret killed him?" "No," Miss Marple said simply. "I think she was terrified, but not of being caught." He looked at her. "Then of what?" She stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, dusk was giving way to darkness. Lights flickered on along the village road. A pair of owls called to each other across the trees. "Of what happens," she said, "when someone desperate enough thinks they have nothing left to lose?" Lestrange was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you believe Peter Nash is that desperate?" "I think he's afraid," she replied. "And people who are afraid do foolish, dangerous things." There was a knock at the study door. Constable Finch stepped in, his face pale. "Sir, there's been a break-in at the vicarage. The back window was smashed. Nothing taken, but—" Lestrange stood sharply. "Who was staying there?" "3 guests from the gala, including Georgina Arkwright." Miss Marple met his eyes. "It's beginning," she said quietly. "What is?" "The unraveling." Chapter 7. Shattered Glass and Shifting Stories. Vicarage sat at the end of a tree-lined lane, its ivy-covered brick facade glowing faintly in the moonlight. Normally, it was a place of peace, home to Reverend Arkwright and his wife Georgina. But tonight, its quiet charm was shattered. Literally. Miss Marple arrived just minutes after Inspector Lestrange and Constable Finch, the cold air biting against her gloves as she stepped over the crushed glass glittering on the back garden path. The kitchen window had been smashed inward, not with brute force, but with precision. A neat circular break, as though made with a gloved fist or the end of a walking stick. "Whoever did this," Lestrange said, crouching beneath the windowsill, "knew exactly where the latch was." Inside, the house was dimly lit and filled with the scent of chamomile and coal smoke. Georgina Arkwright stood in the sitting room, wrapped in a shawl far too elegant for the hour. Her lips were drawn thin. Reverend Arkwright hovered near the fireplace, visibly agitated. "I was upstairs reading," Georgina said. "I heard the sound and called out, but when no one answered, I rang the bell for the constable." "And nothing was taken?" Miss Marple asked, stepping lightly through the kitchen door and into the hallway. "Not that we can see," said the vicar. "But it's possible something small, something personal, was taken." Lestrange turned sharply. "Like what?" Georgina hesitated. "A locket," she said at last. "Silver, very old. It belonged to my grandmother. I kept it in the drawer near the sideboard. It's gone." "A locket," Miss Marple repeated, her voice neutral. "Yes," Georgina said. "Oval, with a green ribbon. It wasn't valuable, not in money, just sentimental." But Miss Marple noticed something peculiar. Georgina's eyes had flicked to her husband as she said it. Not nervously, no. It was a flick of confirmation, as though silently checking they were still telling the same story. "Why would someone break a window?" Lestrange asked. "Just to take a locket that isn't worth anything?" The room fell still, because it wasn't about the locket, Miss Marple thought. It was about what might have been inside. She wandered into the hallway, eyes scanning the carpet, the framed photos, the shelf of books that hadn't been dusted in weeks. On a small writing desk sat a bouquet of lily, already drooping. A letter opener beside it gleamed faintly under the lamplight. "Has Mrs. Arkwright ever shown the locket in public?" she asked suddenly, not turning around. Georgina's voice came from behind her. firm and too quick. No, never. Miss Marple turned. "I believe you were wearing it last spring," she said gently. "At the parish garden party. A silver oval. Green ribbon. I noticed it when you spilled lemonade. On your skirt? I happened to be sitting beside you at the time." Georgina's face froze. "I may have worn it once," she said at last, "but I've not had it on since. Certainly not recently." Lestrange stepped forward. "Who else knew where it was kept?" "No one," Georgina said quickly. "Not even the housemaid." Miss Marple sighed softly and walked to the window. She looked out into the garden. "It wasn't random," she said. "Whoever broke in knew where to look and what to look for. They didn't care about the window or being seen. They wanted to retrieve something before someone else did." The vicar cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Are you suggesting someone?" "Inside the village is. I'm suggesting," she interrupted kindly, "that secrets are rarely hidden in locked drawers. More often, they're slipped into the space between two people, one who knows and one who pretends not to." Georgina looked down at her hands. Miss Marple turned to Lestrange. "Peter Nash came to the vicarage earlier today, didn't he?" Lestrange blinked. "Yes, to return a misplaced glove." "Was it misplaced?" Miss Marple said quietly, "or planted?" No one answered and somewhere in the stillness of the hallway, the ticking of the grandfather clock grew louder. Chapter 8. The man in the photograph. The next morning, Miss Marple rose earlier than usual. The village was still draped in pale mist, and the cobblestones outside her cottage shone with dew. She dressed warmly, took her tea in the sitting room, and watched the street beyond her lace curtains. She wasn't watching for anything in particular, not yet, but in Marleycombe, who walked where and when could be as revealing as any confession at 8:30. She walked to the church, not for prayers, though she did say a silent one, but to visit the vicar's archive room, a small, dusty chamber at the back of the church that few people even remembered existed. With Reverend Arkwright occupied at the rectory, and Georgina no doubt recovering from her dramatic evening, the building was quiet. She let herself in with the old iron key that still hung, without irony, behind the altar. Inside, the archive smelled of damp paper and old hymnals. On the far wall hung a framed photograph from 1911, the Marleycombe Founders Gala. 24 people posed on the lawn of Ravenhall in stiff Edwardian fashion. She studied the image for several minutes, then removed it carefully from the hook and placed it flat on the table beside the window. There he was. Nathaniel Harper's grandfather, Sir Edgar, standing beside a woman in a tall feathered hat. Not his wife, but someone else. Miss Marple had seen her face before. Recently, and then she remembered. The locket. The one Georgina claimed was her grandmother's, but the face inside hadn't been a maternal one at all. It was that woman, so why had Georgina lied? She was still pondering when the door opened behind her and Inspector Lestrange entered, holding a manila envelope. "I thought I might find you here," he said, setting the envelope down. "Good morning, Inspector," she said mildly. "I find photographs far more honest than people." "I've just received the forensics report," he said. "Blood on the brooch matches Nathaniel's, but there was also a single fingerprint." "Let me guess," said Miss Marple. "Not Margaret's." "No, it matches someone else from the guest list." "Peter Nash." Miss Marple did not react. "I also interviewed the gardener at Ravenhall," he continued. "Says he saw Peter and Nathaniel arguing by the stables the morning of the gala. And just before Nathaniel walked away, he said something strange." "What was that?" "He said, 'You think I don't know, but it's all in the letter. Miss.'" Marple's eyes brightened faintly. So there was a letter. And more than one person knew about it. "Yes, but the letter found in Nathaniel's desk, the one we assumed was meant for Margaret, That was dated 2 days before the gala. This gardener insists the fight happened the morning of. So either there was a second letter, or someone pretended the first letter was about Margaret. Miss Marple finished, when, in fact, it may have been about someone else entirely. Lestrange stepped closer to the photograph she'd laid out. "Recognize anyone?" she asked. He studied the image. "That's Sir Edgar. Who's the woman beside him?" "I believe that's the woman in Georgina Arkwright's locket." Which means either Georgina lied about the locket's origin, or she's related not to the Vickers family, but to the Harpers. Lestrange narrowed his eyes. "You think she's a Harper by blood?" "I think she's spent her life denying something that connects her to that family, and Nathaniel found out." The inspector turned back to the envelope. "We'll speak with her again, but carefully. Whoever killed Nathaniel didn't do it in haste. They waited for the perfect moment, and they knew how to vanish in plain sight." Miss Marple reached for the photograph again and turned it over. On the back was faded writing in pencil. "E. Edge and MG minus 1911. Raven Hall Gala. E.H. is Edgar Harper," she murmured. "But M.G. Margaret? No. Margaret Linden would have been a child, if born at all. This is a different name." She stared at I.T.M.G. Mary and Georgina. Her eyes widened just slightly. Georgina Arkwright hadn't married into respectability. She'd escaped something, and now someone had tried to drag her back into it. Chapter 9. Threads in the dark that evening. Inspector Lestrange convened a quiet meeting in Raven Hall's smaller sitting room, the one Sir Edgar had once used for hunting parties and late-night brandy discussions. Now it served as a makeshift interrogation chamber. Outside, a cold drizzle fell over Marleycombe, and the wind rattled the old window panes as if it too was impatient for the truth. Miss Marple sat knitting near the hearth, her needles clicking softly as Lestrange prepared his notes. Across from them, Georgina Arkwright perched on the edge of a velvet chair. She had dressed with deliberate elegance. Her hat was impeccable, and her gloves were spotless, but her composure frayed. At the edges, Lestrange cleared his throat. "Mrs. Arkwright, thank you for coming." "I came because I have nothing to hide," she said coolly. "Then perhaps you can explain something for us," he replied. He lifted the old photograph, the one from the Raven Hall Gala of 1911, and placed it on the table. "Do you recognize the woman standing next to Sir Edgar Harper?" Georgina barely glanced. "No." Miss Marple's voice was quiet but firm. "You should. Her initials are written on the back. M.G. Mary and Georgina. A striking resemblance to you, I must say." Silence. Lestrange leaned forward. "You claimed the silver locket was your grandmother's, but this woman isn't on your mother's." Sighed. "She's a Harper." Georgina's lips parted, but she said nothing. "We believe," Miss Marple continued gently, "that she was your mother, Sir Edgar's mistress, not his wife, which would make you Nathaniel's half-aunt." A sharp breath escaped Georgina, as though the truth had been waiting behind her ribs too long. "Yes," she whispered. "She was my mother, but no one ever spoke of it. Not in public. Not even to me until I was nearly grown. She died when I was 12. I was sent away to be raised in a different county, under a different name." Lestrange nodded slowly. "So Nathaniel knew." "He found out just days before the gala," Georgina said bitterly. "He had documents. A letter my mother wrote to Sir Edgar, begging for support, for recognition. He said he didn't know what to do with it, but he knew I'd tried to keep it quiet." "Why?" asked Miss Marple, her tone neither accusing nor cruel. Georgina drew herself up. "Because I married into a good name. Because the vicar, my husband, doesn't know, and I wanted it to stay that way." Lestrange was silent for a moment. Did Peter Nash know? Georgina hesitated. "I think he suspected. He found the locket once, a year ago. Asked about the photograph inside. I told him it was an aunt, but Peter is clever when he wants to be. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Clever or calculating? I'm not sure there's a difference with Peter. The room was quiet save for the patter of rain on the windows. Miss Marple laid her knitting aside. One more thing, Georgina. Why was the locket hidden in the sideboard drawer? If it meant so much to you? Georgina looked away. Because it was gone. Someone took it weeks ago. I assumed it was lost. Then the night of the gala, it reappeared on the table near the punch bowl. I put it back in the drawer and locked it. Miss Marple and Lestrange exchanged a glance. Someone had. Wanted Georgina to see it again, not to honor her, but to warn her. Lestrange stood. Thank you. That'll be all for now. But don't leave the village. Georgina gave a hollow laugh. Where would I go? As she left, Miss Marple spoke softly. She didn't kill Nathaniel. Lestrange frowned. How can you be sure? Because she's too careful. She's spent her entire life covering up a lie. A person like that doesn't stab someone in a garden room. They bury things slowly, quietly. The inspector folded his arms. Then who? Miss Marple picked up her knitting. Again, the person who killed Nathaniel, she said, wasn't trying to hide a secret. She looked up, her eyes sharper than they'd been all evening. They were trying to destroy someone else's. Chapter 10. The second letter rain fell harder that night, blanketing Marleycombe in a hush. The trees outside Ravenhall bent beneath. The wind, their branches tapping against windows like fingers demanding to be let in. Inside the grand estate, the walls seemed to listen, and the house, so recently full of music and candlelight, now echoed only with suspicion. Miss Marple sat in the library, a small fire crackling beside her. On the table lay a bundle of old estate papers recently recovered from the Harper family safe by Constable Finch. Among them were bills, maps, and household inventories. She had been searching not for financial records, but for voices, scraps of written thought, names. In margins, sudden changes of tone. These were the kinds of clues people didn't mean to leave, and then she found it. Folded between two property surveys was a letter, never mailed. In a different hand than Nathaniel's dot, it was dated 4 days before the gala. Nathaniel, I trusted. You, after everything, after all the years I protected this place in your absence, you repay me with this? You think I won't act? You don't understand how deep this goes, how many lives you'll ruin, if you go forward with your plans. I swear I will stop you. You leave me no choice. And Miss Marple read it twice, then once again aloud, her voice low. She murmured she had assumed the first letter was from Margaret Linden, but that had been addressed to Margaret. This one was from someone else, and it was written. Before Nathaniel's death, the door opened quietly behind her. Inspector Lestrange entered, rain still glistening on his overcoat. I just came from Peter Nash's rooms at the inn, he said. We found a blood-stained handkerchief hidden in the fireplace ashes, monogrammed. Whose initials? G. A Georgina Arkwright. But she claims it was stolen. Miss Marple held up the second letter. Then we may have two liars, or one manipulator. Lestrange took the letter and read it, frowning. Another threat. But this signature, not Margaret? I don't think so, Miss Marple said. I think it's someone who knew Nathaniel more intimately. Someone who felt betrayed. Lestrange paced, rubbing his jaw. Then who? Georgina's first name is Marion. It could be her again, Miss Marple nodded. It could. She stood slowly, walked to the bookshelf, and ran a hand along the spines. She paused at a slim green ledger and pulled it free. Inside was a guest list, handwritten by the event planner, for the Raven Hall Gala. Dozens of names, couples, a few out-of-town guests, distant cousins. One entry stood out: Mr. and Mrs. Martin Grafton, London. Friends of the Linden family. Miss Marple tapped the page. "Gee," she said quietly. "Martin Grafton." Lestrange raised a brow. "He was there that night?" "Yes, but no one's mentioned him. Not once. Not Margaret. Not Peter. Not even Georgina." Lestrange frowned. "Why?" "Because," she said, "everyone's so busy focusing on the people who live in Marleycombe. They've forgotten to look at the one who doesn't." There was a long pause, and then Lestrange asked, "Where is Mr. Grafton now?" Miss Marple didn't answer, because somewhere deep in her memory she recalled a moment, a face in the crowd at the gala. A man standing just inside the conservatory doorway, not dancing, not drinking, just watching. Martin Grafton had been there when the lights flickered, when the screen pierced the air, when Nathaniel Harper collapsed to the floor, and no one had seen him since. Chapter 11. A face in the frame. The next morning dawned gray and restless. Fog coiled low around Marleycombe's hedgerows, and the town square sat eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Word had spread that Inspector Lestrange was now seeking someone who'd attended the Raven Hall Gala, someone who had seemingly vanished without a trace. Mr. Martin Grafton. Miss Marple, however, was not in the square. She was standing at the far edge of St. Aldwyn's churchyard, umbrella planted in the damp earth, her eyes fixed on the old Harper family grave. The inscription was familiar: Sir Edgar Harper, 1871 to 1933. A man of vision and secrets unspoken. Catherine Harper, née Ashcroft, 1875 to 1946. And beneath, in smaller letters, "To be joined again in time." But it was the empty space below the inscription that caught Miss Marple's attention. Room for two more names. She turned as constable. Finch approached, his cheeks pink from the cold. "They've found something," he said breathlessly. "At the inn. Room 4. That's where Grafton stayed." Miss Marple followed him into the narrow upstairs corridor of the Marleycombe Arms. Room 4 had already been unlocked and entered. Inside was the usual guest room simplicity: bed, chair, and a small dressing table. But on that table sat a photograph frame, overturned. Lestrange held it carefully. "We found this behind the wardrobe." He turned it over. Inside was a black and white photograph, faded, but still sharp enough to make out the subjects. 3 figures. Sir Edgar Harper, a younger man with the same angular features, and standing just behind them, a woman holding a child. Miss Marple's face changed, subtly but completely. "That's not just anyone," she said softly. Lestrange looked at her. "It's Martin Grafton," she continued. "The child. His mother worked at Raven Hall as a housemaid. She was dismissed in disgrace. Local gossip said Sir Edgar had interfered with her reputation." Lestrange turned back to the photo. "You think this is why he came to the gala?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "Martin didn't come just to celebrate. He came to settle something. Nathaniel Harper's return may have awakened more than social obligations. Revenge?" Lestrange said, "No," she said thoughtfully. "Correction. They found more under the mattress. A small envelope marked to be opened if I disappear. Inside was a folded letter. No signature, but the contents were clear. He lied. He told me the land was never promised. But I have the deed. My mother kept it. Proof that Sir Edgar meant to give her a portion of the estate. Nathaniel laughed when I showed him. Said I had no legal claim. But it's not about legality. It's about what's owed. He said he'd burn the paper. I told him I'd stop him. One way or another." Lestrange exhaled. "We've been looking in the wrong places," he said. Georgina, Peter, Margaret, all of them had secrets, but they were distractions. The motive was never greed or inheritance or jealousy. Miss Marple nodded. It was justice, at least as Grafton saw it. There was a long pause. Then Lestrange asked, "Why disappear afterward? If it was justice, why not stand by it?" Miss Marple's voice was calm. "Because sometimes the people who believe in justice the most also believe it requires sacrifice." They stood in silence. Then Miss Marple turned to the open window. Somewhere beyond the hills, a train whistled faintly. Chapter 12. A visitor at dusk, by the time the sun began its slow descent behind the hills of Marleycombe. The village felt changed. The rhythm of life, children laughing near the green, the smell of hearth fires lighting up from chimney pots, still continued. But beneath it all, a hush lingered, as if the village itself now knew what it had harbored, what had danced and killed. Within Ravenhall. Miss Marple sat in her drawing room, knitting resting in her lap, eyes on the clock. Mr. Tibbs, her cat, watched the front door with the same anticipation. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. She rose, smoothed her skirt, and opened it. Standing before her, soaked from the evening drizzle, was Peter Nash. His coat was rumpled, his jaw unshaven. His usual charm had worn thin, replaced with something far more honest, fear. "Come in, Mr. Nash," she said calmly. He stepped over the threshold, hesitant. "I'm sorry to intrude." "You're not intruding. You've come because you've run out of places to go." He looked at her sharply. "I heard they're looking for Martin Grafton," he said. "The whole village is whispering. Inspector Lestrange thinks he did it, but I know what I saw." She led him to the armchair near the fireplace. "What did?" "You see?" Peter's hands trembled slightly. "The night of the gala, just before the scream. I was in the corridor, the one leading toward the conservatory. I saw Grafton walk past. He looked strange, pale, angry, but not like a man about to kill someone, more like a man who already had." Miss Marple said nothing. Peter stared into the fire. "I didn't say anything because I was afraid it would come back on me. Everyone knew I owed Nathaniel money. Everyone knew we'd argued. But now you want to be cleared," she said gently. He nodded. "If he's guilty, then I'm not. That's how this works, isn't it?" Miss Marple gave him a kind look. "That's how the law works. But not justice." Peter shifted. "What do you mean?" She walked to a side table and took something from a drawer, a small object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully and laid it on the table between them. A silver locket. Peter stared at it. "That's the one found at the scene. The one we were led to believe belonged to Georgina Arkwright." He looked confused. "Didn't it?" Miss Marple shook her head. "No, it was hers once. But she gave it away, years ago, to a young woman who worked at Ravenhall before the war." Peter's face paled. "Martin Grafton's mother," she said. "Why would she have?" "Because they were sisters," Miss Marple finished. "Marian and Alice, both daughters of Sir Edgar Harper, by two different women. Georgina was raised in privilege, Alice in shame. But the blood was the same." Peter's voice cracked. "Then that would mean Martin Grafton," she said, "is not just an old family servant's son. He's a Harper, just like Nathaniel." Peter slumped in his seat. Then, "His motive wasn't just justice," Miss Marple said. "It was restoration. He believed Ravenhall was his by right, or at least that part of it should have been. And when Nathaniel threatened to destroy the only proof of that, he acted." Peter swallowed hard. "So it's over then. He's the one." Miss Marple folded the locket in the cloth once more. "No, Mr. Nash, it's not over." Peter looked up, startled. She met his eyes. Because you found that locket after the gala. You picked it up from the floor and planted it in Georgina's drawer to protect yourself. Peter's lips parted. I didn't. Yes, you did. Because you thought Georgina would have more power to deflect suspicion. And because you were frightened. But planting evidence only deepens the lies. Peter sat back, breathing hard. Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. You didn't kill Nathaniel, but you didn't trust the truth would save you. And so, you made the kind of mistake only the guilty think to make. Silence fell. Finally, Peter whispered, What should I do? Tell Inspector Lestrange what? You saw. All of it? Let the truth speak for itself. Peter looked into the fire, then gave a slow nod. As he stood to leave, Miss Marple touched his arm gently. Cleverness will get you through many doors, Mr. Nash, but it's conscience that lets you sleep once they're closed. He left into the rain, his silhouette fading into the mist. And Miss Marple, returning to her chair, finally picked up. Her knitting again, the pattern still unbroken, though the threads were beginning to tie themselves together. Chapter 13. Secrets beneath the surface. The village of Marleycombe had become a place where every glance and whisper seemed loaded with meaning. Even the postman lingered a moment too long at the vicarage gate, and the baker's wife peeked cautiously from behind curtains. Miss Marple knew well how fear and suspicion could twist the simplest gestures into threats. That morning, she visited the village shop where Mrs. Pettigrew, the proprietor, was rearranging a display of fresh bread. Their eyes met briefly, a shared acknowledgement of the tension suffusing the village. People have started locking their doors, haven't they? Miss Marple said softly. Mrs. Pettigrew nodded. It's like a cloud hanging over Marleycombe. Secrets, Miss Marple mused, are like weeds in a garden. They take root quietly, but can choke the most beautiful blossoms. Later, Miss Marple returned to Raven Hall with Inspector Lestrange. The house was quiet, save for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional creak of settling wood. In the library, a pile of letters and notes lay spread across the large oak desk. Lestrange was sifting through them with furrowed brows. More correspondence between Nathaniel and that mysterious M, he said. Miss Marple picked up a folded note, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. I warned you, the past does not stay buried. This family's sins are more than just whispered tales. They are living things, growing and ready to strike. She looked up. This is more than a feud. It's a history of betrayal. Lestrange nodded. And it's clear that someone wanted to stop Nathaniel from exposing it. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to a cracked porcelain vase by the window. Sometimes, she said, the loudest secrets are the ones carefully concealed beneath layers of silence. Lestrange sighed. What do you make of Margaret Linden? She's been silent for days. She's afraid, Miss Marple said gently. Not just for herself, but for what revealing the truth could do to the village. Just then, a soft knock interrupted them. The housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, entered, her hands trembling slightly as she handed Miss Marple a small, folded piece of paper. I found this in the servants' quarters, she said quietly. It wasn't there yesterday. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully. It was a short, hastily written note. If you want to know the truth about the night, come to the old boathouse by midnight, alone. Lestrange exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. Do you think it's a trap? Possibly, Miss Marple replied. But it could also be our last chance to hear the truth without the masks. The clock chimed 9. Miss Marple took a deep breath. It's time, she said. Chapter 14. Midnight at the boathouse. The moon hung low over the mist-shrouded river, its silver light casting long shadows across the weathered wooden planks of the old boathouse. The air was thick with dampness and the distant croak of frogs. The world seemed paused, holding its breath. Miss Marple approached slowly, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The note had been clear. Come alone at midnight. No one else got inside. The boathouse smelled of rotting wood and river mud. A single lantern flickered on a crate near the far wall, casting a shaky glow. A figure stood in the shadows. Miss Marple's voice was calm, steady. I'm here. From the gloom, a man stepped forward. It was the village handyman, Tom Wilkes. A quiet man, usually unnoticed, but tonight his eyes were sharp, almost desperate. You're brave to come alone, he said softly. I'm here for the truth. Tom swallowed. I know things, saw things that night. Things people want buried. He took a deep breath. Nathaniel had enemies, sure, but he also had secrets. Ones that went deeper than family feuds or money. Miss Marple listened carefully. There was a second letter, Tom continued. One no one's found yet. It was meant to be hidden in the old boathouse. Nathaniel wanted to use it to prove his claim, to show the village who really owned the land. Do you know where? She asked. Tom nodded. Under the floorboards. But the letter isn't just paper. It's a map. A map to a chest buried near the oak tree by the riverbank. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. And who else knows this? Tom looked away. Only me. Until now. She smiled gently. Thank you for your honesty. Before she could ask more, a sudden noise startled them. The creak of the boathouse door swinging open. Both turned sharply. Standing in the doorway was Martin Grafton, face pale but determined. I knew you'd come, he said. Miss Marple looked at him quietly. So did I. Chapter 15. Confrontation in the shadows. The tension in the boathouse was thick enough to cut with a knife. Martin Grafton's eyes flickered between Miss Marple and Tom Wilkes, a mixture of anger and desperation simmering beneath his calm exterior. So, Martin said slowly, you found out my secret. Miss Marple regarded him with quiet steadiness. It's no longer a secret, Mr. Grafton. The village deserves to know the truth. Martin's jaw tightened. Truth is a dangerous thing. Nathaniel didn't understand that. He thought he could. Threaten me with the past, but I'm the one who controls it now. Tom shifted uneasily. Martin, you don't have to do this. You can come clean. Martin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Come clean? After all these years? After being cast aside? No, I have waited too long. He stepped forward, eyes blazing. Miss Marple stood her ground. Violence won't restore what was lost. Martin's gaze faltered for a moment, but only a moment. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the boathouse. The lantern's light flickered wildly as the door burst open. Inspector Lestrange and Constable Finch hurried in, weapons drawn. Martin Grafton, Lestrange called out, step away from them. You're under arrest for the murder of Nathaniel. Harper. Martin's shoulders slumped. The fight drained from his eyes. It had to be done, he whispered. For the family's honor, Miss Marple nodded. Justice is not vengeance, Mr. Grafton. As Martin was led away, the first light of dawn filtered through the boathouse windows, washing away the shadows and marking the end of a long, painful chapter. Chapter 16. The truth unveiled the following morning. Marleycombe stirred to a muted sense of relief. News of Martin Grafton's arrest spread quickly, yet the village remained heavy with questions. At Raven Hall, Miss Marple and Inspector Lestrange met once more in the grand library to piece together the final threads. Lestrange laid out the evidence, the letters, the photographs, the testimonies like a puzzle, slowly revealing its image. Martin Grafton, Miss Marple began, was driven by a lifetime of injustice and the betrayal of his family's legacy. His mother's dismissal, the denial of her rightful inheritance, and Nathaniel's refusal to acknowledge their claim festered into something fatal. Lestrange nodded. His anger reached a breaking point the night of the gala. He confronted Nathaniel, who who threatened to destroy the proof, the letter and the map hidden beneath this very estate. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Yet even in his rage, Martin tried not to harm anyone else. The crime was personal, but the consequences were wide. They fell silent, letting the weight of the truth settle. "Do you think the village will ever be the same?" Lestrange asked. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "No, but perhaps it will be wiser." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light across Marleycomb's rolling hills. A new day dawning after the last dance at Ravenhall. Chapter 17. Healing wounds. The days that followed Martin Grafton's arrest were marked by quiet reflection in Marleycombe. The villagers, once eager for gossip, now walked with somber faces, understanding that beneath their peaceful facade lay scars deeper than they had imagined. Miss Marple spent her mornings in the garden, tending her roses with gentle care. She found comfort in their steady growth, a reminder that even after the harshest winters, new life could flourish. At the vicarage, Reverend Arkwright began to hold open gatherings, encouraging the community to come together, share stories, and find common ground. Georgina, freed from the weight of secrecy, started to speak more openly, her guarded demeanor softening. One afternoon, Peter Nash visited Miss Marple's cottage, a letter in hand. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for showing me that honesty, even when it's difficult, is the only way forward." Miss Marple smiled. "We all have our parts to play, Peter. The truth may hurt, but it also heals." As twilight fell, Miss Marple looked out her window toward Ravenhall, its silhouette outlined against the fading light. "The last dance may be over," she whispered, "but the music of this village will play on." Chapter 18. Whispers of the past. The gentle rustling of autumn leaves accompanied Miss Marple's walk through the village. The air was crisp, carrying faint echoes of the past that seemed to linger among Marleycomb's cobblestone streets and aged cottages. As she passed the local bakery, Mrs. Pettigrew smiled warmly, her eyes reflecting a renewed sense of hope. "Things are settling down," she remarked, "though some old wounds take time to heal." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "History often leaves its mark, but it's how we choose to remember it that matters." Later, she visited the village archives, where boxes of old letters, photographs, and records awaited cataloging. Among them, she found a faded diary belonging to Mary and Georgina Arkwright's mother. With careful hands, Miss Marple began to read, uncovering stories of love, betrayal, and sacrifice that had shaped the lives beneath Ravenhall's shadow. Each page revealed a new layer to the tangled history, reminding her that the present was inseparable from the past. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, Miss Marple closed the diary and looked up with quiet resolve. "The past will always whisper," she mused, "but it's our choices that write the future." Chapter 19. Shadows in the garden. Even as autumn deepened, the garden at Ravenhall remained a place of quiet mystery. The once vibrant blooms had faded, their petals scattered across the wind, much like the secrets that still lingered among the ivy-covered walls. Miss Marple found herself drawn there one chilly morning, her fingers brushing fallen leaves as she searched for something unseen. Inspector Lestrange joined her, carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I found this among Martin Grafton's belongings," he said, handing it to her. Inside were old photographs and letters, some unopened, others marked with cryptic notes. Miss Marple examined a faded photo of a young Marian, Georgina, with a man whose face was half hidden by shadow. "Who is this?" she asked. Lestrange shrugged. No one in the village recognized him. She frowned thoughtfully. Another thread in the tapestry, one that might explain more about the family's tangled past. As they continued their walk, the garden seemed less a place of endings and more a space where stories waited to be discovered. "Even in shadows," Miss Marple said softly, There is light for those who look carefully. Chapter 20. The Unseen Hand. The final days of autumn wrapped Marley Combe in a tapestry of amber and gold. A village prepared for winter, but within Ravenhall, a different kind of reckoning took place. Miss Marple and Inspector Lestrange sat by the fire, reviewing the last of the letters and photographs found in Martin Grafton's possession. Among them was a note, written in a hurried hand. Some truths must remain hidden for the good of all. Not all debts are paid with justice. Some are settled quietly. Out of sight. Miss Marple looked up, her eyes thoughtful. Who else might have been involved in the years of secrecy and silence? Lestrange shook his head. That, I suppose, is a question for another time. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Yes, the past is never fully unveiled. There is always an unseen hand shaping the stories we tell. As the fire crackled, the two sat in companionable silence, knowing that while the mystery of Nathaniel Harper's death was solved, the echoes of Ravenhall's history would continue to ripple through Marleycombe for years to come. Chapter 21. The Last Dance. The winter winds swept through Marleycombe, scattering the last of the autumn leaves across the village green. At Ravenhall, the grand ballroom lay quiet once more, its polished floor reflecting the pale glow of frost through the tall windows. Miss Marple stood at the edge of the room, her gaze distant yet resolute. The memories of the gala, the laughter, the whispers, the sudden scream felt both distant and vivid, like shadows flickering at the edge of a candle's flame. She thought of Nathaniel Harper, whose secrets had torn apart the village, and of Martin Grafton, whose desire for justice had ended in tragedy. But amidst the sorrow, there was also hope, a chance for Marleycombe to heal and move forward. A faint smile touched Miss Marple's lips as she whispered to herself, "Every dance must end, but the music never truly stops." As she left the ballroom, the first snowflakes began to fall, covering Ravenhall in a soft, silent blanket. Outside, the village slept peacefully, unaware that the last dance had been played and that a new chapter awaited. Chapter 22. New beginnings. The village of Marleycombe woke to a world transformed. Overnight, the snow had laid a pure white quilt over fields, rooftops, and winding lanes. The hush of winter brought a stillness that seemed to cleanse old wounds and invite new hope. Miss Marple stood at her cottage window, watching children make footprints in the fresh snow and neighbors exchange warm greetings. The village was changing, subtly, quietly, as if the weight of the past was finally lifting. Inspector Lestrange joined her, carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "It seems Martin Grafton's confession has brought peace," he said. "The village is beginning to trust again." Miss Marple smiled. "Truth, no matter how painful, is the foundation upon which healing is built." Lestrange nodded. "And thanks to your insight, justice was served with kindness." She looked out toward Ravenhall, its grand silhouette softened by snow. "Every ending," she mused, "is simply a new beginning in disguise." As the sun broke through the winter clouds, casting golden light over Marleycombe, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The last dance at Ravenhall was over, but the story, like the village, would go on. In the peaceful English village of Marleycombe, the sudden murder of Nathaniel Harper during a grand gala at Ravenhall shakes the community to its core. As suspicion and secret swirl, Miss Marple quietly observes the hidden tensions beneath the village's polite surface. Through careful attention and psychological insight, she uncovers a tangled history of family betrayal, hidden identities, and long-held grudges involving Nathaniel, Georgina Arkwright, and the mysterious Martin Grafton. The investigation reveals that Martin Grafton, a forgotten heir seeking justice for his mother's dismissal and his rightful claim to part of the Harper estate, confronted Nathaniel in a desperate act to protect his family's legacy. Despite the tragedy, Miss Marple's wisdom and compassion help the village begin to heal, emphasizing that truth and understanding are the foundations for new beginnings. As winter blankets Marley comb in snow, life moves forward, quietly, with hope, and Miss Marple reflects that while every dance must end, the music of the village's story will continue.